G'day and welcome to another episode of Ian Smissen's Photography. In this episode we're going to be looking at using telephoto lenses for landscape photography. Often we think of wide angles when we think landscapes, but there are many opportunities for shooting telephotos. The first thing I'm going to do is to demonstrate how telephotos can be used for different purposes. One, just to zoom in to get a narrower angle or to magnify part of the scene, but secondly to change the perspective by combining the change in the angle of view with the distance between you and the subject. Often people talk about telephotos creating compression. It's not that they actually create compression themselves. It's just that when you compare the distance between yourself, that is the camera, and the subject and then the background, it's the relative distance between the subject and the background that counts in comparison with the distance between the subject and you as to what the perspective actually looks like. So let me demonstrate. So this first shot I'm going to take is with a 24mm lens, and I've got rocks down here in the foreground on both sides. In the sort of close midground I've got this little clump of grass between some rocks and then some larger rocks, and then going around with this rocky reef and the mud flats out into the background and the trees and the headland out behind me in Westernport Bay. So I'm going to take that shot from here, and then I'm going to put a 200mm lens on and pick out a part of that shot, and I'm going to compare the 200mm shot with the equivalent cropped out of the 24, and you'll see that they're identical. So let's take those two shots. So that's one shot at 24mm. Now I'm going to zoom in to 70mm without moving the camera on the same settings. I'm at ISO 100, f11 and 1/125th of a second, and I've got that set to manual exposure, so that's not going to change. Now let's look at the crop from the 24mm and the full frame 70mm side by side. As you can see, there's no difference. So simply zooming does not change the perspective. All it does is magnify part of the image. So to show you what the effect of perspective has, as you've seen with those previous shots, just changing the focal length doesn't change anything with regard to perspective. But what I'm going to do now is I'm going to take a shot with these rocks and grasses in the foreground with a relatively wide angle lens, and then I'm going to move back up the beach, keeping these rocks and grasses in the foreground are at the same size, or as close to as I can get them to the same size in the frame, and watch what happens to the background as we do that. So let's give that a go. All right, first shot. 24mm. I'm about 2.5 meters away from the front of this big rock in the foreground, and if I switch to video here, you'll see that rock is taking up about the bottom third of the frame. So I'm going to take that shot. And now I'm going to move out to 70mm, which is just under 3 times as far away. So if I move back about another 5 meters and zoom into 70, that should keep those rocks about the same size in the frame, and we'll see what happens to the background. So let's just hold on. just going to move you out of the way. All right, I'm now about 7 meters away, and I'm going to take that shot. Now I'm going to change over lenses again, put a 200mm lens on, which is about 3 times as far away again. So I'm going to move back about another 12 or 13 meters, take the same shot, and let's see what happens. Okay, that's the third shot. I'm about 20 meters away from those rocks in the foreground now, and you'll be able to see that the rocks in the foreground, the rocks in the midground, the mid-background trees, and the background are really compressed together now. They're not compressed because of the telephoto lens alone. They're compressed because I've changed the relative distance between the camera, the subject, and the background. If I shoot from exactly the same place, it doesn't matter what lens I'm using, that perspective stays the same. I'm just cropping in by using a telephoto lens. But if you want to change the perspective, you want to emphasize the background against the foreground, and you want to cut things out, it's not just a matter of zooming in. Change your feet, move around, try and find the right angle that allows you to balance the composition of the shot so that you can get the best composition in relation to the subject against the background, and the angles that you can do are about moving your feet. Give it a go. I'm going to put that into practice and see what I can find for compositions using a telephoto lens and using my feet together. You can see where I'm set up here with the tripod mounted over this rock. One of the advantages of having these really long legs on the tripod is that you can set them up at weird angles. But what I'm trying to shoot, and apologies for the flare I think that I'll end up getting in the GoPro lens, is these two mangroves over here. Ideally I'd like to wait until high tide, but I have no idea what the weather's going to be like, and at the moment I like them backlit because I get the bright sky in the background, the bright surface of the mudflats and the sea, the bright sand in front, but the dark rocks, and then that light coloured mangrove branch and trunk that's lying between the two trees, and it's lit. So this is going to be a really high contrast shot, so I'm going to shoot it at -2 to +2 exposure values in a 5-shot bracket, and I'll probably HDR it, but I may end up just blending them if I don't need the full HDR, and see how that goes. It may end up being black and white, it may end up colour, and I'll produce the two and see which one I prefer. For this second shot, I moved back a few steps and 2 or 3 steps to the left so that I could line up that little trail of pebbles from the bottom right corner curving around into the centre and leading your eye to the two trees. And I really like the black and white rendition of this with high contrast. Now I really like the shape of this tree, and I like it from this angle where it's backlit with the reflecting sun off the sea and the bright sky behind it. The problem I have though is shooting at this angle with a wide angle lens like I've got in the GoPro here means that I've got the horizon cutting through the top third or top half of that tree, and it just looks a bit weird. I'd like to be able to shoot it from much higher up, but shooting high up at this distance is going to be very difficult for me unless I've got a step ladder. But if I move back, if I spin around and show you what I've got here, if I move back over to here, you can see where the tripod is, and if I'll go up to it, set back 20 or 30 metres and higher up, that extra elevation and distance and zooming in to a telephoto focal length means that I'm now able to frame the tree the same size in the frame that I wanted, but I can get the camera up above the top of the tree and shoot slightly down on it so that the horizon with that dark band of island in the background doesn't cut across the tree. Now you can see I could have come up here and shot that tree from high above, but I lose the background reflections. So it's important to try and find the right location to shoot from so that you're lining up your composition to get the subject lined up with the background you want, framing it so that it's the right size, and getting the right perspective by moving the camera and then zooming in or out. Give it a go when you're out there.